See you all out there today. If you haven't voted, you ought to get out of this webinar and go vote. Okay. I did my voting earlier this week to avoid the lines, and I understand the lines are really long. So that's a good thing. Happy to have you with me today. However, Tea Time for the Toast with the Toast Dude is brought to you every month. Generally the first Tuesday, sometimes the second, depending upon my availability, from 3 to 3:45. And it's always some topic that deals in some way, tangential or not, with management and also with lean. I'm Bruce Hamilton. I'm the Toast Dude, so to speak. And I'll try to be brief. I generally try to cover a big topic in a very short period of time. So I'll probably give you some notes to take away. I should get the notes from the session. Today's session is about lean learning, and something that I think we all continue to do on a daily basis. And oddly, I'm going to throw a lot of books at you today, and I have a reason for that, and I'll share that with you in just a moment. Even though I firmly believe that you need to learn this process by doing it, I think there are some excellent texts out there, and I think some of them may not be available to you. You may not be aware of them, so I'm just going to throw them out there and let you think about them, all right? So I have an analogy here that I'd like to use, and here you see it. Grounding our lean learning includes both knowing how, having the know-how, and also the know-why, which is a phrase attributed mostly to Shigeo Shingo, who made this comment, and he made it in a particular context that I'll share in a moment. But there are many ways to know how, actually, and many ways to know why. And if we'd like them grounded, there's probably some do's and some don'ts and things that we should focus on as managers and also as employees. So to kind of extend this analogy, having our learning kind of with a good foundation, let's say that that know-how is, let's call that the information part. We need to receive some technical training, some techniques. There's some specific techniques. Everybody kind of knows about them, I think, or many people do, and we refer to them often as the tools, lean tools. They certainly could be QC tools, Six Sigma tools, TPM tools. I'm tending to focus today on lean, but the same applies, and I don't want to give the impression that I think that I'm just worshiping the lean god. I think these other tools are just great. When used appropriately, if it solves a problem, that's fine, not a problem. So there's that aspect, and this is where we tend to spend, have focused a lot of our energy. Not necessarily a problem, but I have some thoughts about it, because sometimes, we think we are in control of a tool, we think we know what we're doing, and maybe there's more to learn. There's continuous learning, in fact, that our depth of understanding will tend to grow if we continue to study, but we could get short-circuited pretty early in the process if we kind of consider our training to be something that was taught to us on Thursday by a consultant, like me, or that we read in one book and then dropped it. An awful lot more to the technical side. So I don't want to diminish that. There's been an awful lot said about this other side in the last several years, and it's very important. Not necessarily a new topic, but the know why. Why do we do this? The inspiration behind what we do. Having a reason for what we do is really incredibly important. And maybe we've overlooked it. Maybe we've sort of laid those tools out for employees, expected that they would just embrace them without a challenge. And we've discovered, pretty much that that's not the case. It doesn't happen automatically, that they need to have some understanding of why they're doing making these changes, because the changes often feel difficult. Even for managers, they feel particularly difficult because it almost feels like we're undoing things that we have done in the past. Okay, so let's say that has to do with the principles. So as an instructor for the Shingo Institute, I talk a lot about principles these days, and I think they're really important. I think they're important in our personal lives, certainly in our work lives as well. Things that govern our thinking, that kind of ground us. They definitely ground us because they have consequences. If we follow them, they have consequences, and if we don't, they also have consequences. And they tend to be fairly universal. It doesn't matter what organization you're in or what line of work you're in. There's some basic principles, and I want to talk about those certainly as well today. Very important. Now, the principles without the tools, they don't really have meaning. They don't have context. You can't talk about one without the other. The two of them go together. We have a tendency to learn serially. In fact, principles kind of came along much later, maybe 10, 15 years in our discussion, 10 or 15 years later than the tools. That's a shame, because if you read back through some of the, the old school lean folks, the TPS folks, the principles were always in there. I think we just sort of glammed onto the tools because they seemed a little more glamorous. Principles, when I was a young man, they used to refer to the principles as fluff. So you can see the problem there. You don't get a lot of traction if people think that what you're presenting to them is fluff. And then there's something kind of in the middle. I wasn't sure exactly where this should go, but let's put it right here in the middle and call it concepts. Concept might look like a principle, but in fact, it is definitely information. In fact, there's a lot of misconceptions. That's a challenge. That's a challenge right there. If the concepts are not that challenging, if we didn't already believe something, diametrically opposed to it. So they're very important as well. We'd like to ground our learning. We have to ground it in a good understanding of the tools, correct concepts, and also some very important lean, or let's call them TPS principles. All right. So think of the two watering cans as one of them sort of being water and the other being fertilizer. Got to make sure that our learning grows. It doesn't just stay the same. And it's us. It's our learning. It's specific to me. It's what I know. It's not something that is superimposed on me from another organization or another person. It's for me to learn. Okay, so how do we create that particular environment? So let's start out kind of in a very fundamental area, and that is to extend the analogy a little bit, planting a seed. Okay, so you may recognize this triangle here as Maslow's hierarchy of need. And at the top there is, certainly we all have these needs. Doesn't matter whether you're a manager, top management, a frontline employee. We may express them differently. Certainly in terms of physical safety, there could be far greater worries at sort of frontline jobs than in top management. But we all have these worries and these needs, and there's this with them that we have to take care of. I don't consider this necessarily to be a selfish thing. It's not, actually. In fact, there could be some with-ems that are very altruistic as well. But in terms of getting started with learning of any kind, and particularly with this lean learning, because it's change in an environment, and often change in an environment where there's stress, so there's concern. Already I have concern, and I want to know before I buy in what's in it for me. Okay, and that could be a person in the lower corner there, could be a manager, or it could be an employee. So I'm not making any distinction here. They may see it in terms of their own work, but they still all have these kind of universal concerns. And guess what? Right up here at the top, that's the engagement part. So the continuous improvement really can't kick in unless we take care of these other things, the survival and the safety, and feeling that I belong to an organization and the people appreciate what I do. And now I might be inclined to be making some improvement, to taking some risks, because I feel like I'm in an environment where it's safe to do this and where it's appreciated. And that, incidentally, once again, is universally true. It's not just for the frontline employees. Now, look, most of the improvement should be coming from the frontline. That's the biggest group. They're the people who are out there to do the work, but it's not, it's not sort of just for them. It's for everybody. So we have to plant a seed. If we would like to ground our lean learning, we have to make sure that we have done something that kicks this off on the right foot. And this is sort of self-promoting, not intended to be really, but that was the purpose of Toast Kaizen. For those of you who have looked at this video, it was out there to to let people know that this isn't about, you shouldn't be fearful of this. This is things that can be helpful to you, that it's about what you see. It's your world and your environment, and you're the expert. You're the knowledge worker. You're the one who actually can make the change, and we're going to create an environment together where that can happen. So this is a good starting point. Look, a lot of companies just don't start there. They don't start by putting people at ease. They start by alarming them. And that's a bad start. So before we can even ground our lean learning, we're in a position where there's fear. All right. So something to think about. So let's talk about the tools part of it, the know-how, as Mr. Shingo put it. And he, it said, before we know how, we should know why. Let me sort of take issue with that a little bit. I think we should know how and know why at the same time. I think the know-how and the know-why are two sides of the same coin, and they can be presented that way. No question about it. As we're learning something new, it should have context, it should have meaning, it should be greater than just the individual tool that we learn. Once again, that's not something which has occurred with great regularity. The tools have kind of been laid out there in classes. You take a class in 5S, and then everybody runs out to the floor and starts sorting things. Or maybe worse, maybe they go out to the floor and they do nothing. You just take a class in 5S. Now, one company I remember took the class in 5S, and then the owner hired other people to come in on the weekend and clean things out. That wasn't really a good process at all, as you can imagine. So there was a principle involved there. You probably guess what that is. No respect. But there's a ton of tools. I've just shown a few tools here. There are tools which relate to specific, disciplines, such as engineering or sales or accounting. I've just got the short list here. There's a long list of them. I was talking with somebody just earlier, from a large company, a very good company. He said, we've got all these tools out there, but it just doesn't seem like anybody is doing anything with them. We've got the know-how, but don't seem to have any traction. They don't go anywhere, and I hear that a lot. The Shingo Institute absolutely has tried to address that, and I think they have very well, and I'll talk about that in a moment, but that's the condition. So we have the know-how, or let me say, we think we have the know-how. So before I go any further, let me talk about that, because I have a concern that organizations start down this road and they take a single class or maybe half a class, or they watch a video and they think that that's adequate. They think they have learned something. Every day, people talk to me about, oh yeah, we use the Toast video for standardized work, or we use the Toast video for Poke-Yoke, or I'm scratching my head and saying, I wonder how that works. Because it's just an icebreaker. There's nothing in there. There's no content. There's no meat. There's actually some real rules and some guidelines, and there's some experts who have come before and people that we can listen to learn this stuff. So I'm going to just say that maybe we're just lazy learners. Maybe we need to work a little harder on the technical part. And the danger is that I continue to visit companies who say, well, we've moved beyond the tools. We have all the tools. We just don't have the culture. You ever hear that? But here's the problem. When you go and visit their floor, they don't have the tools either. They don't have an understanding of the meaning of the tools. They say they have standard work, but actually what they have is sort of a visual method sheet that's got no standard whip, no tack time, no cycle time, no nothing. It's just they've taken work instruction and they put pictures in it and they call it standard work. I was in a factory last week and they said, oh, we want you to look at our Kanban system. So we went to the factory and there was no Kanban in the factory, but in the stock room, there were stickers printed by, some computer system that were barcoded, and these stickers located the inventory, and they called that the Kanban. They said, oh, we have Kanban. So, I refer to Kanban often as the most misunderstood Japanese word in the English language. There just are so many, so many examples of what we think are best practices, but in fact, we haven't dug into them a whole lot. Standardized work and Kanban are very deep topics that can be very different from one organization to the next. There isn't a one size fits all. There's a lot of learning to do and a lot of mistakes to be made in order to make it right. It's kind of the way the learning goes. So organizations that think that they have moved beyond the tools, but in fact do not have a detailed understanding of what the tools really are, they got a more fundamental problem than those principles. The principles are important. Now, let me add that perhaps if they understood the concepts and the principles, it would lead them to have that deeper learning. So they definitely go hand in hand. As I said, it's hard to look at this serially, and we are today. I'm looking at it serially again because I can't talk about it, in 3 dimensions or 4 dimensions. But the fact is that oftentimes when if you take an inventory of these tools and you say, well, we're using this and we're using this, they aren't working, probably would be a good idea to go back and take a look and see if the technical details are understood in the first place. Okay. So here's a bunch of books I said I was going to throw at you, and we don't have to go through every one now. And they're by no means the only books. You may notice that I think without exception, they're all Japanese authors. And, that's because I guess I'm old school, but these are folks that actually did the work. These are primary sources. The book on Kanban has got some rules in it that we should know. Do you know the 6 rules of Kanban? You know the Kanban should have set location, set quantity, and set withdrawal. What do you know? Do you know how many different types of Kanban there are? A lot of organizations don't. They say we got 2 bins. So this is a problem. We haven't grounded our learning with the know-how. Let's not jump too far ahead until we have studied a little bit more. And the studying should be continuous. There are just too many what I call academic sources out there today that are sort of maybe reporting on a book they read, but not necessarily reporting on something they had done themselves. There are some excellent books. That book up in the upper right-hand corner, it's a funny book. It's a little picture book that I use for book studies. I think it's still in print, JIT Factory Revolution. The only downside to it is that everybody's Japanese in the book. You'd like to see some American workers in there. But hey, they cover it in pictures really clearly. They show you the know-why and they show you the know-how at the same time. Good book, very simple. And you learn and you do. You read a chapter and then you go out and do it. Some others here, Kenichi Sakini's got a number of really great books, and that red book on Poka-yoke's got hundreds of examples, as does Shingo's book. There's technical details in these books that are extremely valuable and are worthy of study and study again. New Manufacturing Challenges, an old book. Kiyoshi Suzaki wrote a wonderful book. It's probably 40 years old now, and it's still a great book. It's a great source book on the technical side of Lean or TPS. So the know-how is really important. It's certainly the tools are a necessary but not sufficient part of TPS, but they absolutely are necessary. And if we gloss over them, or I sometimes say we Americanize them, which means we don't feel like that works for us, so we're not going to be purist about it. We're going to dumb it down a little bit. That's a bad idea. Try really hard to understand why the particular rules for things like Kanban are there. They're there so that we can understand the technical details, so that we can make the tool work. And certainly, I've mentioned some wonderful books, but there are also books on learning by doing that help us to learn. So probably it's self-serving to include a book that our manual on continuous improvement, but it's a learn by doing book. We've written chapters that absolutely have you learn something and then do it. Managerial engineering, which that model of the 3-part model in the upper right-hand corner, is really good for managers. It's something that can help you understand how you actually get people to practice. Once again, we have this naive idea that if we take a class and we have one Kaizen event, that people actually figure it out. So I've got a few guidelines up there. It said basically, if you just do the reading and you don't do anything else, you don't do much practice, you end up with a whole lot of doubt. You end up with the theory, but it hasn't been proven, and human nature then dictates that we doubt it. We can think of all the reasons why not. Until we've actually done something with the learning, we haven't learned a thing. All it has done is kind of reinforced our biases. And I'm suggesting in particular that when you're looking for a teacher, choose someone who's actually learned by doing themselves. Okay, doesn't that make sense? There are, this is a big industry out there right now and everybody is teaching it, but ask the teacher, what have you done yourself? Okay, important question. When I say learn with your body, I mean this is something that becomes a second nature to us. The learning is second nature. And the reason I say that is you have some learning right now, which is also second nature, which is wrong. It's wrong. So if you are not actually getting so practiced at this that it's second nature, then you still have that second nature learning, both in terms of concepts and tools. I'll talk about concepts in a moment because they're kind of part of the tools. And it's ingrained and you don't see it. It's that problem of you're a goldfish and you don't realize that you're in a goldfish bowl. But until you start practicing the right things and practicing them every day, you haven't actually learned this. You are not grounded. So what I'm saying is you should learn every day. Cultivate your learning. Make learning part of your day. That's the only way that you can actually make this lean learning stick. So here's a couple examples. I wrote a post on this a while back. I had an unusual experience when we were training employees in our plant, and this is quite a few years ago. But a large part of our population did not speak English as a second language. So we brought in a professional trainer and we mixed in training for TPS with English as a second language. It was far more structured. And she followed something that looks like the TWI list on the left-hand side. And that structured training actually developed people who had a deeper understanding of the concepts than, let's say, the rest of us who were the lazy learners. So the structured method, we talk about how important TWI is to actually learn the job right. We probably should be teaching our best practices the same way. And just kind of out of whimsy, I recall something from the Boy Scouts as well. It looks a lot like TWI. Boy Scouts use it. It works well. Basically we have to assume that people need that kind of help, that we show them, we demonstrate, we let them try it on their own, we coach them. And if we do that, we're grounding the lean learning. But there's another thing about the TWI here, that point number one, it says it's purpose and the results desired. It's purpose. Why are we doing this? Okay, so this starts to head us into that area of why. It's another why. Okay, there's several different whys from an employee standpoint. First of all is kind of that what you might call line of sight. Why am I doing this? I recall visiting a very nice plant and noting that the workplace organization, however, was not necessarily kept very well. There were places for things, but things weren't in them. And when I asked an employee why, he said, because it's only for customer tours. So he didn't really have a line of sight, didn't know. He didn't realize that there was a means here. He confused the means with the end. He figured that the end was that we're just starting to look neat. The relatives are visiting, so we have to clean the house. So as part of that training, we need to kind of walk through that. Why is it 5S important? Why do you need the tools at hand? Why are they needed for setups? Why are smaller lots important? And why are the compounds important? And ultimately, you see the line of sight is now stretching from me and my personal needs to the next process and their needs, and finally to the customer. Okay, so that's what I mean by line of sight. And I mean that, individual ends become means for something else. It's a normal kind of cadence that we have to encourage when we're teaching. Why is that important? When I learned 5S, it was basically for the purpose of finding things so we could do our work. It wasn't for customer tours. I feel lucky that we were not in that situation, but you have to be careful as you're teaching these tools, the technical part, that it has a larger meaning. So here's another kind of line of sight. I've already talked a little bit about the what's in it for me. I think that's a really important question to answer up front. And that what's in it for me can be different. It can, as I said, it can be altruistic. In other words, I want to do a good thing. I want to do a good job for my internal customer. I want to do a good job for the external customer. I want to produce perfect quality. I want to be considered a good employee. Why? Because that's the kind of person I am. I'm just human. I don't like making mistakes. I would like to be in a position where I can always do the right thing. So that's one line of sight that we can encourage. It's incredible to me how few employees actually have a line of sight, even to the next process. It's very vague, and the external customer is further removed than that. So that's one line of sight. And the other is a line of sight that has to do with the company's plans. What's important. Okay, so the company may have no principles. Most companies have some strategy, or they at least have tactics. And we don't have line of sight to those either. That employees receive an instruction in the morning and they just do it. And that's it. That's what they know. And at the end of the day, they're done. And next day receive another instruction. There's no tomorrow. Every day is a new day. And so no line of sight to the future. Lean learning really can't work unless it's seen to be part of a larger system. There's a reason why Toyota called it a system. It's a whole thing. It's a whole deal that includes an awful lot of very important concepts, tools, and principles. And yes, we learn them piecemeal. And we learn them piecemeal because that's how we have to learn. We learn setup production because we have a need to change over a machine. And maybe we learn when we do that setup production that the tools are at hand, that makes the setup easier, that sort of thing. But ultimately, the setup production has a larger purpose. It has a higher purpose. So we need to have employees, in terms of encouraging that learning and cultivating the learning, always thinking of the higher purpose that would be out there. And the principles, are sometimes referred to as true north. I've talked about those in a number of other webinars, and feel free to go back and leaf through those. But there are some very, very powerful principles. Today, I'm going to focus more on the principles from the Shingo Institute, which I think compare very well and line up very well with TPS principles. So Mr. Shingo, Mr. Shingo, the guy who was quoted with first know why and then know how, talked about doing things without actually knowing why. And he was focused at the time on what he called conceptual blind spots. And there's quite a few of them, both for employees and for managers. A lot of these are reinforced by management accounting and cost accounting. That problem where you really don't want to stop the machine to set it up because that'll hurt your utilization, or you gang up like numbers of parts on a setup because that reduces your setup, amortizes it, and looks like a lower cost, even though you're holding up customers who really needed a part which is sitting in a pile. And maybe the parts that you made too soon are then sitting in a pile as well. And Mr. Shingo, in every book he wrote, this little diagram here, this little confusing diagram, which incidentally, the symbols are symbols that came from the Gilberts, not from Shigeo Shingo. It came from Frank and Lillian Gilbert at the turn of the 20th century, like 1905. They were pointing out that, material waits on machines, and that's a process delay, and machines wait on material, and that's a lot delay. There are two different types of delays, and Mr. Shingo wanted to point that out. And I think today, still today, there is a conceptual blind spot that we don't understand the problem of producing that extra material. It continues to look good to us, and or we make some excuse. We don't try quite as hard. No, the idea that inventory is an absolute evil rather than a necessary evil is something he deals with in this book, Non-Stock Production. It's a great book. It's worth a read, okay? But a big deal for Shingo was conceptual, these conceptual blind spots. Understanding the concepts behind TPS or lean manufacturing is really important. Both Shingo and Ono talked about this thing called the cost subtraction principle, and we kind of gloss over that. But the thing they were trying to point out is that, when I got into manufacturing, there was no cost subtraction principle. We could mark up costs all the time. Twice a year we raised prices. Nobody cared. Everybody seemed to be on the gravy train here making money. And all of a sudden you couldn't raise prices anymore. That if you wanted any profit, you had to subtract the cost from the selling price. In other words, the customer sets the selling price. And that was a reason why. That's a reason why, because you can't do anything. If you can't control the cost, then you're never going to make a profit. Now, unfortunately, because we don't really honor that principle, simplest thing to do was to say, oh, let's take all that labor and send it off to, a lower wage region, because that's how we're going to control the cost. That's how we're going to manage the cost control principle. And the reason for that was conceptually, we didn't understand the ideas behind setup, okay? And still don't to a great degree. If we would like to ground our understanding, got to have the right conceptual understanding of the reason why these tools were put in place in the first place. So then there are principles, and sometimes it's hard to draw a line, figure out which are principles and which are concepts. Excuse me, I gotta have some tea. There's some good books here too. Incidentally, let me see a show of hands. How many of you have read all these books? Yeah, I know. I can't see you, but I know you haven't read them. I know a lot of these books have not been read. Some of those books, the how-to books, they're gathering dust, and they're incredibly good books. We have a tendency today to kind of look for the latest book. There's got to be 365 million books on lean today. We don't have 365 million experts. I don't know where they all came from. But these books come from people. Taiichi Ohno, his book, about the size of a Reader's Digest, is the principles behind TPS, is the reason why this stuff all occurred. And yet, I continue to ask people if they've ever read to his Toyota production system. They say, oh no, I haven't read that. We've seen the Toast video. So, here's some homework for you. I'm giving you a library of really good books that are worth reading. This one up in the corner by William Uchi, Theory Z, dealt with the whole business of how we should be treating employees. The idea of Theory X and Theory Y. And Shingo incidentally talked about that too. That basically management has the capability and responsibility to create an environment in which employees want to do the right thing. And in fact, that is human nature if we put people in the right, and if we kind of alluding back to Maslow's hierarchy, we put people in a position where they can self-actualize, where they can make improvements, that they'll want to do the right thing. It just becomes natural for them. It's exciting. And I know some of you out there will attest to that. They'll say it's really true. When people get excited, all of a sudden the learning is easier. The principles and the concepts start to give more meaning to the learning. They help us to study more, to go for more deeper learning than we have right now. That book, Kaizen by Masaki Amai, was one of the first books that was published in English by a Japanese author, and it is an unbelievably good book because it steers us in the direction of what Kaizen really is. Kaizen's another one of those Japanese words which, for some organizations, it's painful. I've actually had organizations tell me that I can't use the word Kaizen because it infuriates employees, and that's kind of an indicator of how misunderstood it is. This Amai's idea that Kaizen is small changes for the better that come from the common sense and experience of the people who do the work is a really important concept. If we get that concept wrong, if we think it's the big brains beating up the little brains, telling them to move out of the way while we fix things, well, that's where the infuriated employees come from. So we want to ground our behavior, read the right stuff. So there's some excellent books that would head you in that direction. And I've included the Shingo model here as well. Certainly, I think that some very good thought has been put into this in terms of, four steps or dimensions of improvement that the Shingo Institute refers to that are intended to give context to the tools that we use to make improvement. You look right there at the bottom, lead with humility in respect to every individual. These are probably the two biggest problems that organizations face when they're trying to make improvement. They wonder why the tools are not grounded, but they're totally disrespectful of their employees, okay? So I'm a strong advocate, not just because we're teaching these courses for the Shingo Institute, but I think there's some great learning here for managers. It's a course that deals with reflection. As Mr. Shingo said, the face we see least often is our own. Something to think about. It's really a great opportunity for, if you can get your management, or if you're a manager, to get to a couple of these courses and have the opportunity to do that kind of reflection. So finally, as we're sort of deepening our understanding, our learning should be grounded in principles. In fact, it probably should be grounded in principles right from the start, so that if I am working on a tool, there's a purpose for it. There's a reason I'm doing it. The purpose is not because management said so, because we have a lean program, not even because we're losing money. Okay, that's probably not a good, certainly that is a burning platform, but there needs to be some higher purpose for making these improvements, things that link all the tools together. So the idea, for example, under continuous improvement, of seeking perfection, that's another conceptual blind spot, incidentally. Many managers think that that's there's somewhere along the line that's cost prohibitive to seek perfection in any way. It doesn't make any sense, doesn't compute. But in fact, as an ideal, it's incredibly important to the Toyota production system, or to lean. So this kind of learning that's grounded in these principles helps us to have continuous learning. It means that wherever we are in the process, there's more learning. And incidentally, there's a lot more learning. If you take any one of those tools or any of these principles, there's so much more to learn, not just from books, but from visiting, good companies that are trying this, and just through practice yourself. Just by cultivating your learning, become a better learner. Don't be a lazy learner. Be inquisitive. Try to learn new things every day. So that kind of wraps up this whole idea of grounding your lean learning. First of all, start out with the idea that learning is difficult. We're going to make mistakes. There's going to be problems. Okay, and we should be sharing everything we do. There is a PDCA in this whole process. It's an iterative process. It's not one where we did 5S, we did standardized work. It's one that every day we have a business issue, we have problems to solve, and we have countermeasures that enable us to solve those problems. And because we keep practicing, we have more and more problem solvers who are getting better and better at solving more and more problems faster and faster. And that's that acceleration that you get when you get everyone involved. So that kind of summarizes the ideas today, that there's several ways in which we can know how, and they involve the tools and the concepts. Understanding the tool, but the concept behind the tool, very important. Having a line of sight, knowing how it affects other people, how it affects our customer. Having visibility and support from management, so that when we are learning and making mistakes, part of that learning is that employees are very valuable and we expect them to make mistakes. And having those principles which ground everything, which give us, kind of that basic understanding of why all of this stuff is so important. So that was a mouthful, okay? And I hope some of this will be that you can take back with you. The slides are going to come out, and I'd encourage you to look at every one of those books. Build a library, start a library or company. If you don't know those books, they're all good. If you'd like some more, I got another list. Send me an email. I'm happy to send you a longer list, okay? Continuous improvement equals continuous learning. So thanks for tuning in today.